This is Conversation Balloons, a podcast of interviews with experts and friends about all things generational. I'm your host, Leah Farish. Today I'm bringing you an award-winning journalist seen in the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Guardian, and many other outlets. She's the author of various books. One is called The New I Do. One is called Not Too Old for That. And the one that we'll be referring to most is called LATitude, How You Make a Live-Apart Relationship Work. And this is Vicki Larson. Hi, Vicki.
Hi, Leah. Thank you so much for having me today.
We're honored to talk to you. In your books, as a journalist, how have you acquired your knowledge base? Who did you talk to, and how did you get your information?
Well, what's very important for me is that I'm research-based. So I deep dive into studies that are out there by people who specialize in the kind of things we're talking about. And I also like to talk to people who are doing the things that I'm writing about, especially like live apart together, because I want to hear the pros and cons from people who are actually choosing that lifestyle. So I never tried to give advice because I don't really have the answers. I have a lot of questions. But I hope that my books can help inform people on choosing the lifestyle that they would like to have, that's most authentic to them.
And so LATitude has the acronym LAT, Living Apart Together, right? And
Yes, it does.
How do you define that kind of arrangement?
So when the term was coined in the 1990s, there were three things that had to be that had to happen for to be considered a live apart together relationship. One, that the couple was in a committed relationship. Two, that everybody else saw them as a committed couple in a relationship. And three, that they did not share the same living space. For the purpose of my book, I really wanted to expand that because I thought that was a little bit limiting. I wanted to include maybe couples who have sleep in different bedrooms, what's stupidly called a sleep divorce. It's not a sleep divorce, but okay. Or maybe do share the same roof upstairs, downstairs, or side by side. So I wanted to be a little bit more expansive than the traditional term for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so your subtitle, which we'll talk about, is How You Make a Live-Apart Relationship Work. So you're focusing on people who are on good terms and want to make the relationship work, but not necessarily always living together.
Yeah. Well, I need to first preface that by saying this kind of relationship is not for everybody. It's just not. If you're anxiously attached or all the other ways that people can be in a relationship, that's probably not going to work. And I'm also not saying that it's better than living or worse than living with someone. It's an option for people. And I'm talking to people who are actively choosing to live apart from their partner, not people who are living apart because of maybe their careers are in different places or they're going to school in different places. So the one thing about a live apart together relationship to make it work is that you really have to work hard. You have to work a lot harder than if you're living with someone 24/7 because they're around all the time. You can talk to them whenever you want. You can visually see them whenever you want. So you have to be good communicators. And you probably know from some of the experts that you have interviewed, it's communication, communication, communication is what makes a relationship work. And so, by the fact that you can't always talk to your partner when you want to, you do have to learn how to be really good communicators. You have to trust. In other words, you need to trust your partner and you need to be trustworthy yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think those are very, very important things for any kind of relationship. And another thing that's really wonderful about it is you can't take your partner for granted, as we often do when we live with someone. Often, when we're living with someone, we are focusing on the negatives. Oh, the toilet seat is up again. Oh, the toothpaste cap is off again. Oh, her underwear is hanging in the shower and I asked her not to do that. Negative, negative, negative. Whereas when you're not with your partner all the time, you kind of have rose colored glasses around them. You're remembering all the things about them that you love and you appreciate. And I think that is very important to make a healthy relationship too.
And I would think that when you don't get to be with your partner all the time, you're kind of on your better behavior. You may not always be the best because presumably when you are together, you're really throwing yourself into it. But you can go a few days without hanging the underwear in the shower. You can
Well,
behave yourself.
yes. So the thing is, I mean, a lot would depend on how close or far apart you live from your partner. Because some live apart together, couples see each other every day, or they spend every night together. They just go and do their things in the day. So, so a lot depends on how close or how far you are. If you are farther apart, you are much more intentional about what you're doing with the time that you're together. And I think that's an important thing too, because you don't get to see each other all the time. So you have to figure out, well, when are we going to see each other? What are we going to do? How are we going to spend our time together? And I like the intentionality of it rather than just kind of, you know, um, bumbling around, in your relationship. Being intentional, I think, it's being mindful, and I think that's another wonderful thing for all relationships, really.
Hmm. Um, do you have certain recommendations about, like, if a single person maybe in later years gets to know someone online, how you move toward maybe not marriage, not living together, but a romantic relationship? What are the caveats, and how do you move toward each other?
Well, the interesting thing in later in life dating, either maybe because of a divorce, or you're widowed, or maybe you've never been married, but maybe you've been partnered and living with someone, you often you have a place that you call home of your own. And it may be a place where you raised children. It may be where you've lived a long time. It may be close to your healthcare providers, your community, your family, your friends. It's very, very hard for some people to pick up and leave all of that behind if you are meeting someone new.
Sure.
Where to be closer to them, or for them to be closer to you, and give up your established community. And so the beauty of this relationship for later in life romances is that you can have the best of both worlds. You don't have to give up your community to have love. But again, you're going to have to create some kind of rules of how often do we see each other, where do we see each other, when do we see each other, do we meet halfway, do you go to one place or another. So there's a lot of conversations about that, but I think it's actually quite beautiful for later in life partners, because you can really have the best of both worlds, a committed, loving relationship and a certain amount of freedom. And I will say, quite honestly, Leah, that it really works for women like me later in life. I'm in my 60s, especially if they have lived with a male partner before, because often many women my age are saying, did all that caretaking, raise the kids, and now I need some time for me. And so it kind of is, the lifestyle is kind of driven by women
Hmm.
over men,
Hmm.
but not always.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that caretaking stage. And I know of a couple of women who really devoted themselves to a very needy husband with physical needs for years, and it virtually broke their health. And they, after that, they had served well, and he passed on. After a few years, they were lonely and had lots of love to give, but didn't have the physical ability to caretake again. And they chose relationships that were, they lived separately, they didn't marry, but they were romantic and they were fun and gave them a lot of joy in their later years, but they were realistic about what they could offer in sickness and in health at that stage. They just
That
couldn't do it anymore.
That's true. And to be clear, it doesn't mean that you don't do any caregiving. I mean, if you love this person, and I'm assuming you love each other, if someone gets ill, you're going to, of course, show up for them. And there's one couple I know, she lives here in California where I live, and her partner of 11 years lives in Maine.
Mm,
And he had a health issue about a year ago, and so she went out there to Maine and took care of him. So I don't want people to think that there's just no caregiving at all. Of course, you're going to care lovingly for the person that you're with. It's just that day-to-day caregiving, which generally falls on women's shoulders. Not always,
mhm,
but generally.
mhm,
And again, especially if a spouse becomes ill later in life or somehow incapacitated, it is a very intensive caregiving. And yes, it can totally just
consume
run
you.
someone ragged.
Yes.
And I can absolutely see that they're not so interested in taking that on again. And it it shouldn't be seen as being selfish or anything like that. They've done that caregiving,
Mhm,
and everyone needs some self care, and a lot of women find that this is a really great time for self care, and also maybe they guard their time more carefully. Maybe they want to spend time with their grandchildren and not have to have a romantic partner around.
mhm.
So yeah.
I could see too that I might not want to be entering a relationship where I might be a burden to the other person. It's not
Mhm.
just not wanting to give care, but maybe not wanting to be cared for. That doesn't feel romantic. That doesn't feel, I kind of want my privacy if I'm suffering. I want my kids in my life at that point more, and I might not be my best self when I'm ill or hurting or not in my right mind. So I can see why both parties to that would want to say, let's keep some separateness. And I
Yeah.
don't want you to feel obligated to
Right.
change my diapers,
Yeah. Yeah.
if it gets pretty nitty gritty.
Yes.
We want to take a moment to thank the Herzog Foundation and its growing media network, home to the Conversation Balloons podcast and other incredible faith-focused shows. The foundation is dedicated to strengthening Christian education, helping families, teachers, and entire school communities pass on faith and wisdom from one generation to the next. They do this through free training events, support for new and growing schools, and a media network. Learn more about how the Herzog Foundation is investing in the next generation at herzogfoundation.com.
Let's dive back in with Vicki Larson, and we're talking about making long-distance relationships work or living apart, maybe even close together, maybe on the same property, but having an apartness in a romantic relationship, and why and how that might be. I notice I thought of two passages from the New Testament that kind of address this. In 1 Peter, it says, live together in an understanding way. And both parts are needed. And I think maybe the understanding way might allow for, let's sleep in separate bedrooms because I snore. And I know you're not at your best when you're sleep deprived. This is not romantic. And we've got an extra bedroom here, and things like that, practical reasons. There are reasons why you might need to work on some issues. If you've got children in the home and one partner isn't doing their best with the kids, there may be a time when they need a time of accountability and uh, self-improvement before you go forward. And yet you don't want to call it quits. You don't think that's the best thing for the kids to completely split down the middle. So there are those kinds of constructive reasons to try a different arrangement. And
This
First
is true.
Corinthians says, don't deprive each other in a marriage except by mutual consent
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
so that you can devote yourselves to prayer. And I think um, it's not abandoning your relationship and your commitment if you say, you know what, this could be good for us spiritually, and we need to focus not on the day to day rubbing elbows with each other. We need to really have some solitude and time for reflection, and to make some new patterns. Maybe we're in a rut, in destructive patterns, and
Well,
maybe one of us needs time away from the kids.
yeah. Well, those are really good points to bring up the sleep aspect, and then I'll get down to the time apart. We are a very sleep deprived society, and that is really toxic to relationships. As a matter of fact, studies show that when couples are sleep deprived, they act out with they fight more, and the fights are much more hostile.
Mm,
So, sleeping separately is an investment in your relationship because you're both better slept and you're kinder to each other. And there was an article in the New York Times during the latter part, during the COVID period, where I forget the exact title, but it was something like The Wife Left, but They're Still Married. And some of the women decided that, COVID was hard. It was 24/7 with loved ones, which was, if you were fortunate enough to not be required to that you could work from home. Not everybody could, and a lot of frontline people could not do that, but many people could. And they moved out of the house and considered the space an investment in their marriage because they were heading for a divorce. Now, when people say, "Oh, but how can you maintain two spaces?" Divorce is expensive if
yeah.
you've ever been through it. It's very. And again, what would you be willing to do to save your partnership. And for some people, it was taking space and time apart to to focus, ground themselves, and to have a new appreciation for the relationship that they have. And it actually has saved some marriages. The funny thing is, Leah, when I was in my early 20s, and I dropped out of college and followed a boyfriend out to Colorado and then married him, I wasn't really paying attention to what my parents were doing. But what happened was my sister and I were out of the house. My mom left my dad and our family home in New York, went down to Florida where my sister was living, got herself a condo, got herself a job, and my dad would come down and visit her once a month with Teddy, our little Yorkie. And they did that for about 10 years. And then he
Wow.
finally joined her in Miami. And when I got divorced the second time at midlife, I was like had a heart to heart talk with my mom, which I really recommend everybody do. Heart to heart with both your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked her, did she like being a mom? Did she like being married? What would she have done differently? And then I said, Mom, what the heck was that about? And she said, well, I'd had enough. And quite honestly, as a wife and a mom myself at that point for many years, I knew what she was talking about. But I kind of think it saved my parents' marriage
Oh,
because they lived in somewhat peaceful coexistence until they both passed, for 61 years. So,
oh, wow.
yeah. So I do
Mhm.
think that it is a way that people can strengthen a relationship. And, even if you don't live separately for forever, even taking some time apart, you can bring a new focus and appreciation back to your relationship.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What do you recommend or what do you see couples doing regarding the finances during those times?
Well, you know, every so one of the biggest myths about live apart together relationships is that it's only for wealthy people. But as you mentioned before, when you meet someone, you're already living separately,
Mhm.
so nothing has to change just because you fall in love. Um, you know, uh, for people my age, we're already living someplace, and sometimes we're living with children or grandchildren. Sometimes we're living with roommates. People who want this kind of relationship are very, very creative in how they make it work. Um, there's one couple I know. Her partner, I think they've been together for 18 years, lives in a small cabin that he built in the California coast out in the boondocks. And she didn't want to live that way, but she also didn't want to live alone. So she lived in a co housing situation. So she had community in the household, and also it was more affordable because
Mhm.
she lives in Marin, where I live, and that's not a cheap place to live, the Bay
Mhm.
Area.
Right.
So she made it work. So
Mhm.
people will make it work. I do live alone, but I rent out a room and Airbnb it.
Mhm.
That's how I make it work. So you can be really creative.
What are some other things people should take into account in how to make this work?
Well, um, you know, one thing that I think is very important is, how to handle that as you age, especially if you live far apart from each other, because um, there may be mobility issues, there
Mhm.
may be financial issues that occur as we get older, and maybe living, you know, on separate parts of the country from each other, as my friends in California and Maine do, maybe that's not going to be so practical as you age. So that is something that one really needs to think about. Um, and again, more about the day to day practicalities, like how often do we talk to each other? Do we have a set time that we talk to each other? What technology do we use? Are we FaceTiming? Are we just chatting on the phone? Are we texting? I mean, if you're living apart, you don't want to, if you're in the middle of a work conference, you don't want your partner to, FaceTime you or
Yeah.
whatever. So you do have to come up with some practicalities,
Yeah.
to decide. And also, how often do we see each other? There's one couple I quote in my book, when her partner moved down the block from her, she started to like, oh no, wait, I don't want to see you every day. So they had to negotiate. Well, they were getting together every day in the beginning, and then it felt claustrophobic to her. So she had to set some agreements of like, okay, here's how, what will make you feel comfortable, how many times to see each other a week, and then, and always those things are, you can shift them as life changes.
Hmm.
So, basically, the only way that a live apart together relationship is going to work is if both people really want it
Right.
and they agree on the same kind of things,
Hmm.
the time that we spend together, how often we talk to each other, so on and so forth. And again, I think an important thing to consider is, you know, is this going to have to change as we get older? And if it is going to have to change, what are the changes that we want?
Hmm.
Do we just move closer together, or do we, get go to a retirement home together and have separate rooms there?
Hmm.
So, but again, these probably should be conversations that people have even living together, especially about like
Yeah.
retirement. People
Absolutely.
often have very different ideas of how they want to spend their
Mhm.
retirement, and couples don't always retire at the same time. Maybe
True.
someone still wants to work and the other is retired and wants their partner to, retire now so we can
Mhm.
go and have fun. But the other person's like, oh, no, 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 no. So these are conversations that all people should have.
Mhm.
You just have to be a little bit more attentional if you're not sharing the same space.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you make a good point about the living arrangements, for the elderly. We've had relatives who one needed to be in skilled nursing and the other did not. They could not live together anymore. She cared for him as long as she could, but then she went to a very upscale, active, you know,
Yeah.
independent living setting and went to visit him daily and helped feed him. It was just no need to divorce, no interest in that, but it was certainly living separately for years at the end of their lives, and
Yeah.
it's not always by choice, but it can't. You make a good point. It can't hurt to talk about it and plan and try to um, be honest about, hey, we're in a different season now,
Yeah.
or the kids are gone, and or I've got this great job and it's in another state, and how are we going to make that work? I was talking to a young woman the other day, a young mother whose husband has been working in another state for a year now, and she said it's been hard, but it's been good, and certainly, the children, when he's there, they're all about each other,
Yeah. Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
they're learning each other in a different way, but, he's missing out on the day-to-day, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there are trade-offs with whatever arrangement you have.
That is so true, Leah. And when you think about it, there are many people whose careers keep them away from home for periods of time. Like, let's say long haul truckers. They're on the road for a long, long time.
Or
You know,
deployments or
yeah, people in the
mission
airline
trips or
industry.
whatever.
Yeah, even firefighters who spend, several days and nights at the fire station. People, or even people who are deployed overseas in the military. People don't have a problem if they can understand when people don't live together 24/7 if it's because of a career. It's harder for people to wrap their head around of people making this a choice. But again, we get to really choose how we want to fashion our romantic relationships, especially as when we're older and maybe, if not everyone has children, but a lot of people do, you're empty nesters and you do have to find a new way to partner when you are empty nesters. You now you don't have the distractions of young children, and so you do have to forge a new relationship of some sort, right?
Yep.
Whether you're living together or not. I think the key is to have those conversations throughout your life and be flexible and know that you can shake things up and you can always change it later on. But you are able to have some freedom to decide, well, what do I want my life to look like now? What would be, what would give each of us the best life and as individuals and also as a couple.
Well, this has been really stimulating, and I'm so glad that you're addressing this. How can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
Well, maybe sadly, I'm all over the internet. I'm on Blue Sky and Threads. I'm not really active on X. I am on Instagram. I have a Facebook page. And my books hopefully are in your local independent bookstore. I do highly recommend that people support your local indie bookstore.
Sure.
We don't want them to go away. And my books are probably in the library too. So that's a wonderful thing. So if not, please tell your librarian to get a copy of the book. And I'm always happy to hear from people.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on, Vicki.
Well, thank you so much, Leah. This has been highly enjoyable.
For me too. Thank you, Vicki. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Subscribe and review Conversation Balloons on your favorite podcast platform. Find me at leahfarish.com and on Instagram at LEAHFARISH. This episode is brought to you by the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Herzog Foundation.